welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our Generate 12.0 office hours. My name is Elizabeth Brunet. I help and work on the Generate team. Appreciate all of you being here. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off and shortly hand things over to Johnny. But just keep in mind, you're welcome to unmute yourself. You can throw any questions you have in the chat. I think towards the end of the presentation, we will be putting our survey link in there. Again, it's really important that you all fill it out and help us. We use that information to try and make these better for you. If there's something that you liked or didn't like, or you think something could potentially be different, again, always helpful to hear that from you all. Okay, so today we will be looking at what's included in the 12.0 release. We'll also be doing a quick preview of 12.1. We'll be getting an update on reviewing the release calendar, and then open discussion for 12.0. Again, if you have questions during the time where Johnny's reviewing anything, you can always chat or unmute yourself. Oh, okay. Thanks, Robin. So at some point, Travis will unmute everyone and you can unmute yourselves. In the meantime, go ahead and throw anything in the chat if you have any questions. And then last thing on the agenda is just what I talked about, our survey. We'll send out the link for that as well. All right, Johnny, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Johnny Cunningham. I am one of the developers on Generate. I am also I don't know about implementation specialist, but I work with states implementing Generate. So I'm familiar with a lot of folks on the call. And then we're going to go over the version 12 release. We've got quite a few things in here to cover, especially there's some significant changes to the UI, and we'll go over those in just a minute. So summary of changes for the IDEA reports. There weren't very many significant changes in this release for the file specific for the SID files. Those we typically do them like the release prior to that set of files opening, but we did have a few things in here, a few minor changes to things you can see there. I'm not going to go through each one of them individually, but they were all fairly minor changes to that 4 set of files. And then the next slide is the set of changes for the non-IDEA files. Again, this was the significant changes in here basically came from the last reporting cycle. There were a few things we found, issues in Generate, some speed improvements, performance improvements in migrations, things like that. Like we did find a few issues with Generate for membership and free and reduced lunch for folks that were working on that set of files. So all of those changes got rolled into version 12 so that they are now part of the core code. We also had a couple down there for directory for 129, and those are now part of the core code as well. So that was the set of changes for non-IDEA reports. And then sort of the big one. So for version 12, and I'm going to sort of demo this in just a second. We had been laying the foundation for this over the last 3 or 4 releases, sort of the pieces that we needed to have in place in order to sort of enhance the migration process, to make it a little easier, a little smoother, provide more information on the UI screen itself. So I'm going to demo that really quick. I'm going to swipe to share. So if you're familiar with the current migration process in Generate, this is our staging environment that's on screen now. Sorry, I got to forgot I'm not actually controlling this one. This is the current migration process. So this would be 11.4. You would go to data store, and then you get the 3 buttons, right? So this is the 3 levels of migration. For those of you that maybe the ETL developers, EDFACS coordinators, depending on roles and how your state sort of divvies up that work. Some of you are very familiar with this. Some of you may not have seen this very much or at all. But the current process, there's 3 steps, right? We have to get the data from your source system, whatever that is, into the staging environment and generate. The second step in the migration is to take it from the staging environment and then transform it and put it into the fact and dimension tables. And then the third step in the migration is to take that data from the fact and dimension tables, apply all of the rules for that particular file specification, aggregate the counts if it's a student level report, and then put that data into the report tables. And then from there, you would go on to create your submission files. So there's 3 steps in the migration, and this is the current process. So you would click staging. Our staging environment is not the fastest, but this should be good enough. We're not actually going to run a migration. I just kind of want you to see this process in comparison. Hopefully. Okay. So the way it works is you would select the school year that you want to migrate. Then you would go down to this second set and select the stored procedure for the fact type that contains the file that you want to run. So for instance, like this second one here, if we wanted to run child count, we would select that. And I apologize, the mouse is going really because there's lag over here. So I've got to make sure I don't miss it. So you would select child count, click migrate to staging, and then that would run the ETL in the background that you've built that's actually going to take the data from your source system into staging. So once you would click migrate to staging, it would run, you'd get some messages about that. Then you could click go to data store. Once it was complete, you would go to the RDS migration screen, which is very similar. You would select the year again, scroll down, select the fact type for the reports that you were trying to run, migrate to reporting data store. It would run that set of processes, go to data store, and then run the reports migration. This one is slightly different because from here, you actually select the reports that you want to run, the individual reports. So you could select 2, scroll down, select 89. Sorry, you'd select the year first as well, and then migrate to report data store. So that's the current process in 11.4. So what's coming in 12 is, sorry. So this is the new process that's coming in version 12. So when you go over to, once you've logged in, you go over to the gear icon, and now it's data migration instead of data store. So you go to data migration. This is the single screen migration page. And I'm going to show you some of the features on here really quick. Similarly to the 3-button process, right? So you would select your year. We'll do child count since that's what we were looking at before. You would select child count, and then the report list at the bottom then filters based on what you selected as your fact type. So now you only have options down here that are executed by the child count fact type. So you have the 2 EdFacts reports, 2 and 89, and then you have the state defined report options if that's something you were interested in looking at. You can filter this list, like if we added, so if you, I think you can do a little slow. You can filter it if you don't want to look at the state defined reports and you only want to see the ones, or if you wanted to filter the other way, you could do that as well. But basically you would select, so if you compare this to the previous process, you would again select the report you want to run, click migrate to report data store. And what's happening in the background is it's actually running all 3 steps. So it's running that first set of migrations that will take the data from your source system into the staging environment, move that to the fact and dimension tables, then take that data, aggregate it, move it into the report table. So all that's happening in the background. So you don't have to do the, back and forth basically to the same screen. The other thing that this really helps us with, or the other thing that we were hoping is going to be beneficial, is there's additional information that's now available here as well. So data migration is this first tab across the top, which is where you would actually execute your data migrations. Once you've started a migration, you can click on this one if you want, and this is the basically the log file, data migration histories, if you've ever queried these tables manually. So this actually shows you a live view of the log. So this will update if you're running a migration. This page polls, and I don't know, I apologize, but like every few seconds, it basically polls the table, the data migration histories table, and shows you the most current set of information. So you'll actually see the messages as the migration is running. The last migration we happened to run was 009. So that's what you're seeing here because we're not actively running anything. So it's showing you the most recent set of things. The other piece of information that's available here is the third tab, which is the staging validation results. This is one of those foundational things that we were talking about, right? Well, first off, let me go back because there's one here. So we had talked about this previously, like 2 or 3 releases ago, and I can't remember which one, I should know. But 2 or 3 releases ago, we put out like shell stored procedures in the source schema that were called source to staging and then the fact type. So source to staging child count, source to staging discipline, source to staging assessments. And that's where you can build your custom ETL that is going to take the data from your state systems, wherever they are, however complex or simple they are, take that data and bring it into the staging environment. The reason we did that a couple of releases ago was to support this, right? So now the single screen migration is going to call that stored procedure because it knows the stored procedure name that it needs to execute. So there's a couple of different ways you can manage that just to make sure everybody's aware. You can, if you already have ETLs built, you can take that ETL and move it into that stored procedure. So basically just take all the code that you wrote and put it in that stored procedure. You could make the stored procedure a shell that basically just calls your stored procedure. So you would just like open up that core one and just put execute your stored procedure name, or SSIS package, because we've got a couple of states I know that like move data with SSIS. So you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can also, because those shell stored procedures are empty, right? We just put an empty one out there for you to either fill in, use as sort of a parent or as a wrapper stored procedure that's going to execute other stored procedures, or if you need to run something manually to populate staging, depending on your environment and what you have set up, you could just populate staging with your own process, right? Whatever that is. And then when you run this migration, basically the migration process is going to call that stored procedure that's empty. It's going to execute it, do nothing, and then move on to do the rest. So if you don't use the shell stored procedure in some way, you would just have to load staging, and then the migration will still work as it always does. So, sorry. Let me get over here.
Johnny,
So,
real quick, we have
yes.
a question Sonali
Yeah.
put in the chat. Sometimes we only run staging. Is there a way to only run staging or only from staging to RDS?
Yes, Sonali. So, and we've talked about this with a couple of different states. We wanted to get the single screen migration out, right? And this is sort of our big development window. We've got a little bit more time between releases, from the end of the child count submission window to the beginning of the next set. And we wanted to get this out, but we have on our plans for probably 12.2, because 12.1, we've got some, you're going to see some of that in the preview. We've got some changes that we have to make that are going to, they're underlying sort of changes, but they're going to be fairly significant, require quite a bit of testing. So it'll probably be 12.2, but we are going to introduce, get to here so it'll make a little more sense. We are going to add an additional option here that is going to have partial migration options. So you could just run source to staging, or if like in your case, Sonali, if you're working on a new file, you're going to run that multiple times, right? Because you're going to load and then you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, that didn't load correctly. Let me go modify my ETL, run it again. And then when you finally get staging loaded the way you want it, it looks appropriate. Then you want to run the rest of the migration. So there'll be options to do that. There'll be options to potentially run just from the RDS to reports. We're finalizing like what we want that structure to look like and how that's going to work in the underlying code. But yes, we're going to add an option where you can run partial migrations. Anybody else have a question about that? Because I don't see questions pop up. I apologize the way this. Okay. So the other piece that I wanted to show you, so across the top, you've got the data migration screen, which is going to let you obviously run the migrations themselves. The data migration log, which is showing you the live view of data migration histories, which is the log table that we use. And then you've got the staging validation results. We don't have any in this one because I haven't run a migration for this, but this is another one of those things we've been adding, like we added the new staging validation code 3 or 4 or 5 releases ago, and we've been like adding rules to it every time, trying to modify it, trying to make it more efficient as we can. That is now incorporated into the migration process. So previously you had to run it manually, right? We didn't integrate it into the migration, but with the single screen migration we did. So as it runs source to staging, like in this case for child count, so it'll run source to staging for child count, and then when that's finished, it will run staging validation for child count, and then run the RDS migration. So you can go to this tab once the staging migration is completed, and you would actually see the list of any staging validation results that you would have. So there are, if you haven't taken a look at it, I would, because, or if you haven't taken advantage of the staging validations. There are warnings just to make you aware of something that, you know, we see something in the data that you may need to be aware of. There are errors, like if a key piece of information is missing, let's say for child count, if we have students that you know, aren't marked as IDEA or don't have a disability type or don't have a race value, right? That would impact what's going to ultimately end up in the report table and in your subgroups in the category sets. So, you know, it'll list that kind of information. And then there are critical errors. Like, let's say, for instance, you run your source to staging migration and the entire K-12 enrollment table is empty, right? That would be a critical error, right? The rest of the migration is not going to perform if we didn't have that data. We currently, because we're sort of working this in, we do not have the migration tied to the errors. So it will continue to run the migration currently, and it will go as far as it can, obviously. But those are really good to review. Obviously, critical errors and things like that you would resolve quickly. But it does point out some smaller issues that you may not be aware of. Like, I think we have a couple that sort of tie a couple of pieces of data points together. There's one, like if you've marked a student as being special education, their dates are consistent with being included in child count, but they don't have a disability type or something, or they don't have a key piece of information. We have validations like that. So what this will do is it'll show you that. It will show you the number of students or the number of records that failed that particular check. And then the show records SQL here is actually going to give you the SQL that you can run in SSMS to actually get that set of students that failed that particular validation. So you can actually get that group of students and look at their data and determine if there's something you need to do depending on what the issue is. If you run this in the background, obviously, you could then take that SQL and do it in SSMS. We're looking at ways that we can incorporate that into this functionality in the future. So like maybe a way to auto execute that from here so that you could see that set of students or get that set of student IDs or something that would allow you to track those students down and figure out what you need to do. But we wanted to get the staging validations into the UI so that you can see them and you're aware of any potential issues. So this is the new single screen migration. This is what you're going to have in version 12. So you've got the 3 different pieces of information. Hopefully, this gives you a lot more relevant information right here in one place to be able to work on your migrations, get that data refined so that you can, spend less time migrating data and actually work on that, refining those last few counts and getting submission files. Any other questions? Because this one's a pretty big one, pretty significant change to generate. Under the covers, it's really not much of a change, right? Because it's running the exact same stored procedures that you saw when we went to the staging environment, those three, if you had selected those boxes, it's running the exact same underlying code. It's just a refined process in the UI. But any questions or any comments, anything I didn't explain or didn't explain well? Okay. And feel free to ask again too if something pops up as we're going forward. I'm not going to bounce back to the slide presentation, even though I should have said this first. The other change that's on the slide when we were talking about the UI changes for version 12 is metadata. So for those of you that have been with us for a little while, you know that's something that comes up every once in a while. That's something we have to verify, or occasionally there are problems with metadata. And so we've been trying to come up with a better process for that, right? An easier process, and also something that one of the challenges we had was we used to release the metadata, or we would put the metadata for the set of files that were coming up in each release. So for instance, like for this one for version 12 previously, for version 12, we would have had all the metadata, the new updated metadata, if there is any, for the next set of files that were being worked on. And then version 12.1 would have the metadata for the next set. The challenge with that we ran into in working with you guys is a lot of times you want to start working on a file ahead of time in Generate, right? You may want to run your last year's data. You want to start working on a new set of files in Generate. So it's one you haven't worked on before. So you want to work on it early so that you can, verify that you've got staging loaded. You can migrate data and you're getting counts. You don't want to wait all the way up until, that file window. So that was always a challenge because the metadata wouldn't have been updated yet. So then we started doing full metadata updates in the last few releases. But again, it was like you had to wait for a release to get the metadata, right? You couldn't get new metadata until another Generate release came out. Okay. Those were the challenges we were trying to work with. In working with the EdPass team, they already had an API set up. So we were able to leverage that and actually do metadata updates through that API so that now they can be basically on demand. So here, if you go to, I don't know if it's going to let me or not. Okay. I'm not sure what happened here. Let me look over here real quick. Now I'm going to be timed out of that. Okay, there we go. That's better. So, sorry. There is now an option down at the bottom. You'll notice we've always had the 3. Now there's an option for metadata. This one's very simple and straightforward, but I wanted to explain what this was and then how you're going to use it. So when you go to metadata, it's basically that, right? It's a single button and it's refreshing the metadata from EdPass. So this is actively going to use the API, go out to the EdPass system, grab the most current set of metadata, pull it down, pull that file down, process it, load it into the Generate environment, into the tables that we use for the metadata. So you can get the most current metadata at any point. But I do want to stress with this, it takes, and this is going to vary, obviously, performance and all of that, 30 minutes to an hour to run this process, right? To go out, pull all of that data down, pull it down into a file, process it, then load it into Generate. While that's happening, you can't run migrations. You can't do the other things in Generate while the metadata is being updated. But what this does allow you to do is, again, at any point, you can get the most current set of metadata. We're going to add some messaging here and in a couple of other places that are going to kind of tell you the status of your metadata so that you'll know if there's a reason to do an update. And then also we're looking at we're trying to figure out the data we can get back, right, from that API and display maybe the metadata that has been updated. So that, for instance, if you're working on a set of files and you want to know, well, is there new metadata for the files I'm working on? You'll be able to see that information, and that way you'll know if, oh, okay, maybe it would benefit me to go grab the new metadata, or there's no reason for me to update it because there's nothing in there that applies to what I'm working on. We don't get, I want to make this clear too, because I don't want you to feel like this is something you have to do every day or you have to check it every day. EdPass does not get new finalized metadata every day. They're working on it in chunks, right? So it's typically going to be in those same sort of windows, right? They'll be working on a full set of metadata for like the next set of files that are coming up. So you're not going to have metadata changes every day. This is not something you need to do every day. I want to make that clear. But the functionality is now there that you can update the metadata on demand, which resolves both of the issues we were having before, right? So you can get metadata when you need it, depending on what you want to work on. And this is a much more streamlined process that, we can get that data in to Generate quickly and easily. So that is a new piece. And there's documentation on the metadata process in Gitbook as well, if you want more detailed information. But as far as what you need to do, it literally is just pushing the button. There is nothing else you have to do or have to set up or anything to be able to use this. Any questions about that one?
Hi, Johnny. This is June from Colorado.
Yes.
I guess I have a concern about the timing. So right now in EdPass, the metadata is going to be for last year's reporting. And we're not able to go in and upload new metadata until EdPass opens that system. And then they get kind of uploaded first before you can start uploading your files. However, I frequently create those files long before they're due when that data starts rolling in to our state agency. So I would be concerned that it's using old metadata, which I cannot update in EdPass until that system opens, and that may be a month or two after I've already started creating these files. So for instance, the special ed discipline files and the staff files and that are not due until end of February. And I've got the data now, so I'm starting those files already. I'm getting them validated. If they had any metadata that went along with them, and that metadata has to be updated, I can't do that until they open that system, which will probably be sometime around mid-January to update our metadata for the 23-24 year. So how is that going to affect the files that I'm trying to migrate through the system and pull reports for at this time?
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So when you're talking about the metadata that you change, you're talking about like the state supplemental survey, that metadata?
Yes.
Okay, this is just the file specification metadata that comes from the Department of Education. That's what this is updating. This is not pulling down your, like, the state supplemental survey responses, although that is something we're looking at doing, trying to leverage that to be able to make Toggle more efficient. This is just file specification metadata. So if they make a change to the file layout, or they add a new category set, or remove a category set, or something like that, it's that metadata.
And
So this
do you
should
know?
not impact
okay.
what you're describing.
So do you know how soon in advance they would be doing that? Because sometimes those file specs can change almost up to the time we're submitting data, and sometimes they even put versions out after the data's already been due. So it is, do we know a time frame again for this metadata kind of being used to update from the file spec, and when the latest version is going into effect? Because we
No,
get
I can.
every 2 weeks, we get weekly updates that they've changed and the file spec version, and then we have to download a new one to get to capture any new changes.
Right.
Is that being impacted by this at all?
It shouldn't be, but now we're stepping into, like another teams where they have much more expertise on this than I do. I can find out the answers to that, but for at least based on my experience of having worked with this now for, a few years on the generate side, the file specification changes that impact generate are like what I described. If they change the layout of the file itself, right? So they decide, this column is now going to have this data and this column is going to be a filler or something. If they do that, if they change a category set, change a permitted value, something like that, or add or delete, obviously that would be included in a change. Those are the sorts of things that generate has to have in order to produce, obviously, a submittable submission file, because we have to, obviously, would have to meet all of that criteria. I know Ed will sometimes put out like file specification changes where they are further describing something or putting in new verbiage but not actually changing the underlying metadata.
Okay.
Not typically. So yeah, generate, we should get it well in advance. I know the EdPass team gets it well in advance. I can't imagine a scenario where the Department of Education, would be changing something that impacts the file in that way in a short time span.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
But I will find out for sure. I will get that information and pass it over to you, because I don't know the timelines for the EdPass team, but I'll find out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any questions about the metadata process? Okay. Liz, if you want to take the share back.
Okay. All right, can you all see my screen? Summary of changes, general.
Everybody there? I see it, so
Okay.
hopefully we're good. Okay, so these are some general changes that went in this time. So one, we added support for OAuth authentication authorization there. You can see there's a document, and I'm going to show that in a second. There's we're going to do a quick little Gitbook section, and I'll show you that as part of that. But we added support for that. So if that's something you'd like to leverage, we now have that. There's a document that explains the configuration changes. We made software updates because we run like frequent security scans against our system that look for vulnerabilities, packages that we use that need to be updated, things like that. So there's some software updates that were made. Nothing that you have to make any changes for in this release, but just make you aware that there were some software updates. In this release, we also added the ability to run generate from a subfolder. I believe, and I apologize if I get that wrong, but I think it was New Hampshire or New Jersey, one of the two, needed that functionality, and we had been working on it over the last couple of releases. So we have that ability now. We'll have some documentation for that as well, for what you'll need to do. And then generally speaking, for migrations, we improve the performance of all of the organization level migrations. So what migrates to DIM SEAs, DIM LEAs, DIM K-12 schools. And then we had talked about this over the last, I think, 2 releases. We used a JavaScript library called Wijmo, and we are looking to release Generate into the open source, and we couldn't with that library in place. So we have been slowly removing our dependence on it. I think that is now completely removed. We have a new JavaScript library. So you will notice, it's not on here, but you'll notice there's some slight differences in like the way the UI screens look. I think we did it in the last release. There's some pretty cool features that we were able to get with the new library that we're leveraging. So there's look and feel might be slightly different because we're using a new library, but we no longer have that dependence. So that's been removed. And then as we try to do we updates to and improvements to utilities each release, like we look for, can we add any functionality to an existing one? Is there anything that needs to be updated based on other changes that we've made, things like that. So those 3 were the changes that were part of this release for our utilities. I think that's it for general changes. Okay, so for documentation, I'm going to take the share one more time. So we're constantly trying to make improvements to Gitbook, first off, to the documentation that's available in Gitbook. But also just adding more documentation, right? As we can develop the documentation or convert previous documentation, update it, One of the things that's been developed that we're hoping is going to have a positive impact for you guys is fact type documentation. So as we've talked about, and we've talked about this in previous releases, Generate is dependent on fact types. Like we have the child count fact type that we used sort of as our demo. And we have one for discipline that runs all of the discipline files. We have one for, Title III EL, Title III ELSY, Title I, homeless, dropout. There's different fact types that handle different files. Sometimes a single file, but sometimes multiple files. So what we were trying to develop, and this is an example, I'm going to just quickly scan it. We're not going to go into huge detail here. We're going to try to create a page for every fact type that has all of the relevant information you would need, right? If you are, let's say you're a brand new state that's going to start working on something, or you're a state that's been with us for a while and you're going to work on something new, right? A new set of files. You would be able to come here, go to the fact type page for the files that you want to work on, and this would have all of the relevant information you would need. So like, what do you need to know for setting up your source to staging, source system reference data mappings? What would you need to know about migrating data to the RDS? Like, are there toggle questions that you need to go answer? Where's the ETL checklist for this particular file or set of files that you're working on? What utilities would be beneficial to you on the set of files you're working on? So we're going to create these. This is the first one. This is our sort of prototype. So this is in development. This is a like a developed branch of Gitbook, but I wanted to show it to everybody because we've got a few more things we want to change here or sort of finalize here. And then we're going to put this out, and we would really love to get your input. But you've got navigation on the side if you want to jump to something quickly. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to control the screen instead of actually the monitor. But again, it's going to have different information in it depending on like what part of the process you're in or the entire process if you're starting from scratch. There's code examples in here. There's links to other documents. So depending on like if it says a utility would be beneficial, there will be a link to the utilities page. There's information about everything you would need to do. And then there was one thing I was going to kind of show you. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll slowly because I hate scrolling in a presentation. But this, just so you're aware as well. So like running an ETL, running a migration, currently in Generate, right, there's two ways you can do that. You can go into your whatever utility you use. We typically say, SQL Server Management Studio or whatever you happen to use. Or you could run a migration from the UI, right? There's two different ways to move your data through Generate. So we're going to have documentation that actually references both ways. Like in the fact type documentation, it'll say, well, if you're running it manually, here's that step. If you're doing it in the UI, here's what that would look like. And this is where I was saying, right, we've got a link here that we're going to create to the single screen migration. But then like, how to validate your data, different parts of the process that you can go through. And hopefully this will provide you everything you need. Would be great. If we can get you most of what you need, that would be a win. And at the bottom of these pages, we're going to have this little feedback option. So we really would like, once we get these pages loaded, we're going to put the assessment one out shortly, right? We're finalizing that one. But we're going to put that assessments page out there. We'd really love for you to go in there and give us some feedback because, is there information like that would be beneficial in this page that we didn't put in there, right? Is there something in here that we need to describe better? Is there information in here that you don't think you need, right? So we can refine the pages. Any feedback you can give us to make these fact type pages better, because then again, we're going to take this model and apply it to all the fact types. So ultimately there will be a fact type page. And I'm showing you again, this is different than if you go to the live Gitbook right now, because this is our development. But under developer guides, there's going to be migration fact type table, and then you'll have the individual fact type pages. But ultimately, we'll have one for every fact type that will go through all of the file specifications. So you'll have, hopefully, as much information as you need to be able to work on a set of files and start to finish, be able to work on a set of files, get a submission file, and finish that set based on the information you have here. So we really would like it if you could go in and give us feedback on this once we get it posted. We'll send something out to everybody. I have to quit bringing my cursor over to that screen. And then too, we would like you to go through this page and see, what information you like, what information you think we're missing, and we could provide for you. Oh, the other thing I was going to show you really quick too, sorry, is the OAUTH. We talked about that one just briefly. So this is actually live currently in the Gitbook page. So if this is something that you are interested in, there is a page out here that has the specific configuration changes that you would need to make if you want to use OAuth. So you can go to the Gitbook page for that, and it will give you everything you need to set it up. And this one is sort of the highlight, but there are lots of documentation updates and changes. There's like two of our ETL implementers and Travis. They're doing a ton of work on this stuff. So there's constantly more documentation being uploaded and improved. So I visit Gitbook often. If there's no questions on Gitbook, I think, Liz, we can go back to the slide presentation.
Okay, thanks, Johnny.
And then preview for 12.1. As always, we are going to have whatever all of the changes, if there are any updates for the next set of file specifications. We'll have any CEDS version 12 updates for the data warehouse. This is the one I was talking about where we've got a change coming in 12.1 that we're going to have to put some time into and make sure that we do all of the validation work on. We're going to be updating the .NET runtime because the one we're currently using, I think its end of life is soon. So we're going to be updating the .NET runtime in version 12.1, so you can anticipate that. And then, of course, we'll have any instructions or anything you'll need to do on your side. And then tool development enhancements, whatever we can fit in, and then also any additional staging validation rules that we develop going forward. Any questions about 12.1? Okay.
Thanks, Johnny.
Mhm.
Okay, so for the upcoming releases, I think Robin was the one who asked a minute ago. So as you are all aware, 12.0 is being released in the next few weeks. We're targeting 12.1 to come out towards end of October, focusing on those specific areas of files. Those will be targeting the February release, the February submission files. Internally, we are working on putting together a calendar for the upcoming year. So once we have that situated and created for you all, I'll be sure that we get that shared out. You can weigh in on it. I know that we have discussed this on these calls as well as some others. If you have specific feedback or anything like that in terms of the actual release dates, please let us know. You can email me directly, and obviously we'll take into consideration anything you guys have to say about that. Any questions here? Okay. Going back to, I know a few of you have put questions and concerns and whatnot in the chat, and then also had come unmuted. Before we move into this evaluation piece, anything specific or any questions for Johnny before moving on? Okay. And as always, you know, you can always reach out to us. You can email us. You can reach out to me directly if you need to, or Johnny, or whoever. We can always, you know, get you associated with the correct person and get your questions answered. So as we stated a few minutes ago, this is the evaluation for this office hours. We really do use this information and try and make things better, make sure that we're targeting exactly what you all need from these hour sessions. So it only takes a few minutes to complete. We appreciate when you do so. So again, let us know if you have any specific comments or concerns, and we can go from there. Dan has also put the link in the chat. Thank you, Dan. That is everything that we have for today. I appreciate you all joining, and again, please let us know if you have any questions or feedback or whatnot. And yeah, I appreciate you all joining. Thank you.
Thanks.